Welcome, everybody. We are so excited to be here today. We've got a great webinar that we're going to be talking about data, using advanced analytics to boost revenue. And I think sometimes that's a challenge for people. They get into the data concept and they start diving in there, but they don't realize you've got to tie it to revenue. You want to use it and make it valuable so that you're actually growing your company. Now, to talk about today's webinar, we brought on a special guest. Unfortunately, that is not myself. You know me. I'm Gabe Larson. I'm the Vice President of Growth here at InsideSales.com, but we brought Maria from McKinsey and Company. Maria, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here and to talk about a topic that is such a hot topic and in the agenda and in the head of so many of the executives that I work with in sales.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, to your point, kind of the cream of the crop when it comes to just trends and people trying to figure out, how do I do more of it? And we're going to be tackling some of those questions today. Maria, do you mind just taking a minute and telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do over at McKinsey & Company?
Of course. Maria Valdivieso, I've been with McKinsey & Company for 15 years. I'm in the Miami office, and I'm one of the leaders in our global marketing and sales practice. Within that, I spend all my time working with companies in topics related to sales and channel. So how to go to market, how to think about advanced analytics in sales, go-to-market strategy, digital capability building, and a bunch of other topics. It's been my passion, and I really enjoyed working with sales forces, right, with heads of sales all the way down to frontline sellers. To understand how the customer is changing, and then how can organizations adapt to that change to take advantage of the opportunity and capture growth.
Yeah, fantastic. I've been extremely impressed, obviously, with McKinsey & Company and some of the things Maria has done. One of the things you will see in the post follow-up email is a link to her book. You can find it on Amazon, and talks a lot about data, talks a lot about sales, marketing, and how that's working out. And so you definitely have a thought leader here, and I think we'll get into some fun stuff here in just a second. Now, as we got a couple stragglers coming in, both myself and Maria have taken a minute to introduce ourselves. We'd love for you guys to introduce yourself. If you can, grab the Q&A box down there. Just type your name and where you're from. Mostly, I want to see that just so we know who kind of is coming online here. And then number two, I want you to get familiar with that Q&A box. This session is for you. We want to make it valuable. And so get used to using that Q&A as we go through that. Looks like we've got Kirk, Chris, Michael, Nikki, David, Justin, Tim. Fantastic, you guys. Thanks for coming on. And we're excited again. Make sure you use that Q&A box as we go through here. So let's dive into the topic at hand. And we want to talk about analytics. But before we do, we want you to take just a minute and just see if you can help us define where you are in your own analytics journey. So the question here is, how effective are you at using analytics in your business? And you've got kind of a scale of 1 to 5. You can scroll up and down there. Don't use it. Not effective. Somewhat effective. Go ahead and punch your answer in there. We've got Dano, thanks for coming. Jim, Jeffrey, Christopher, fantastic, you guys. Again, thanks for coming again. Continue to use that Q&A box. So, Maria, I'm going to put you on the spot with an audience like this. And again, we've got a couple hundred, about 300 people tuning in here. What are your thoughts? Do you feel like most people will be on the lower scale? You think they'll be on the higher scale? What's your gut tell you?
And I will share some research that we've done in a minute, but I would say that many of them are thinking about it, right? I think that there's very few that have a lot of very sophisticated analytics and insights coming from the analytics, and they're very good at using it. I would say that a few of them also struggle with how to make it actionable for the sales rep, right? One of the things I see many of the clients I work with is they have these fantastic models, but the sales rep either doesn't understand it, doesn't have access to it, or doesn't even know how to apply it. And I think there's some of them who are still in the very basic stage of just using really basic analytics. And frankly, there's a lot of impact that you can get just from using basic analytics. My guess is that we'll see a wide range in terms of how effectiveness and use of advanced analytics with the audience.
I love it. Well, let's see what the audience kind of sent here. So to your point, yeah, look at that. Oh, actually, the majority say somewhat effective. So you've got 60% somewhat effective. You've got some people at the bottom rung saying, I don't really know. I don't even know what's going on here. And then very few people at the top. So it sounds like the audience is thinking about it, but certainly hasn't gotten the value of that. Surprised, or how does that kind of relate to the overall data you guys have seen?
Why don't we go to, share with you some of the insights that we've seen. This is based on some research that we did with over 1,000 companies globally, where we basically asked them a few questions related to their use of advanced analytics. What was interesting is that then we had enough information on their performance that we were able to separate top performers from bottom performers. We saw that top performers were further ahead on every single element of using of advanced analytics. And then one of the few interesting facts, first of all, that about half of them think that advanced analytics are absolutely critical. It is interesting to think that about half don't necessarily think that, right? I think some of them are not there yet. The other one is that about 53% think of them as being effective users of analytics, right? So there's the other half that still says, analytics are important, but we're still not being effective with it.
Interesting. Real quick, there's a couple questions coming in. One from Tom, just about the data. Maybe we're just getting there, but what types of companies were included in this? Was this large, small, certain industries, or was it just kind of a nice breadth?
It was a nice breadth. So it was across industries, mostly North America and Europe. It was small and large. We tried to, we probably had half that were on the larger side, right? We were trying to go to, which is harder to get when you're doing research. So we really tried to anchor to make sure that we had some large organizations in there as well. But we had a wide range in terms of industry sectors, as well as size of company.
Yeah, fantastic. Interesting. Okay, yeah, continue.
So the other thing that we saw is that organizations and fast growth organizations are doing this more than everybody else. They're investing and they're planning to continue to invest in analytics. They recognize the importance of using analytics for better decision making. One of the things that I work with executives and they tell me they struggle with is just there's so much to choose from, right? So I think there's a little bit of trying to understand what use case am I trying to solve for? What information do I need for that? And therefore, how do I manage this, very complicated landscape of offerings? So that's a struggle for them. But I think in terms of fast growth companies, I think that it is clear that they need to invest more and they will continue investing in advanced analytics for better decision making in sales.
Yeah. So one question, again, this is coming in from Sharon, it looks like. And you and I talked about this a little bit pre-show, and we had one person also write in, so maybe this is a good time to ask it. But you're mentioning advanced analytics. Some people are familiar with the term AI. Some people are hearing some of these different data terminology. Can you take a second? What is advanced analytics, or how would you define that versus maybe other data words in the market?
Yeah, so I would separate advanced analytics from automation. So automation is using technology to take over an activity that potentially an individual was doing before, right? So just to share with you some research that we did within the McKinsey Global Institute, which is McKinsey's research arm, is that if you look at today's technology, about 40% of sales activities could be automated, right? There's a lot of follow-up, a lot of, the lead generation front, that can be, with future technology, that could be up to 50% of sales activities could be automated, right? So I think this is a very interesting question for executives in terms of how do you think about ensuring that you have your human power, human resources aligned to where you need them to be and where they add the most value, right? Because reality is that automation is going to increase, is here, it's going to increase to be here. The way we think about advanced analytics, and there's different flavors of advanced analytics, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in the session, but advanced analytics helps you make better business decisions at all levels in terms of what customer segment should go after, in terms of what next product should I offer, in terms of deal scoring and pricing, agile pricing, in terms of, managing the performance of a deal or the performance of a sales force. So one of them is to help you make better decisions, and that would be advanced analytics. And automation and artificial intelligence would actually help you replace some of the human interaction with automated interaction.
Perfect. I think that's very helpful. We had a couple people write in, I think, trying to figure out that definition. I think you nailed it. Fantastic.
Wonderful. So we continue here. One of the messages I wanted to share is that I work with a lot of companies across different sectors. And what's interesting is that I have seen different levels of sophistication across the different sectors. Having said that, I have seen tremendous impact, right? So if you look at specialty chemicals, this was a company that had a very complex and large product portfolio. And they were really struggling with making sure that the sales force was knowledgeable enough of the entire product base and matching the product with the solution. They were able to use advanced analytics to be able to do that, to better match product to solution. They were also able to use advanced analytics to improve retention rates, right? Like churn for them was very high. And they were able to predict what customers were more likely to stay, what customers were more likely to leave. And that was based on historical performance. So in this case, advanced analytics was used to predict performance. Second case was a software company. And for them, they had a large sales force that was discounting quite a bit on the price of the different products. And the variability in discounting just provided so much room to improve margins by just closing that variability in performance in terms of discounting. And they used the tool to help them create some visibility and then some additional information and predictions in terms of how to do better deal discounting to maximize close rates while at the same time at a higher price and a higher margin. And then the last one was a logistics company. I would say they probably had the least sophisticated starting point from the companies that I've seen, but they were very good at thinking about the long tail, right? Because companies that work with or sales reps that work with large companies, large accounts, it's really easy for them to know the customer itself. When you work with the large tail and when you work with small and medium businesses, you need analytics to help you as a shortcut. You need to predict what they're going to buy, what they need, and to penetrate them. You cannot use the human power. You don't have enough information in each one of the companies itself to be able to individually process them. And in those cases, analytics has tremendous impact as well. In the case of
let me ask you a quick question because we have an interesting question coming in from Paul here, and I think it fits right here. Real quick, Maria, is he's just asking, and I'm trying to paraphrase. It's got a little bit of a longer paragraph, but when organizations kind of dive into advanced analytics, how are they structuring that? Is that typically held within a sales strategy group? Do they have their own data scientist type teams, and that rolls more into kind of the operational side of the house? He's kind of just trying to figure out structurally how does a team start actually doing this analytics part of the business?
I have seen different models, so let me share both, and I'm sure there's many more. But one of the models I have seen is within sales operations, right? So within sales operations, actually identifying, first of all, top down, what are the use cases that you're trying to solve for? And having those very clear, because again, the list can be very long, but how do you prioritize what are the use cases that you're going to go after? I would say that's number one. Based on that, building the team. And, you will need data scientists and you will need, technology and potentially that's external technology besides what you already have within the organization. The second model I have seen is companies that are already very sophisticated in the use of advanced analytics, where advanced analytics is its own function. It's the same way that you have IT and HR and finance, you have advanced analytics, and they provide services to the different functions within the organization. And within that, they will have some specialization in sales. So I have seen it both outside the sales organization, and again, for companies that are more sophisticated overall in advanced analytics. And I have also seen it as a specific capability developed within the sales operations group.
Perfect. I think that's it. Paul, if there's a follow-up to that, let me know.
Wonderful. So moving on here, and we talked a little bit about this, right? But there's a lot of buzzwords right now in terms of what do we mean with advanced analytics, automation, end-to-end. I like the word cloud here to the left. And I think the message that I wanted to share in this page, in addition to what we already talked about, is that I have seen companies use basic analytics and get tremendous impact from that, right? So I think that in this world of where do I even get started, and I have a lot of data and I don't know what to do with the data, I would say go back to anchoring on what is the use case, and then go back and think about it from the perspective of your customer or your sales rep, right? So if you want the sales rep to make better decisions, to focus on the accounts to drive performance, to price a deal, at a better competitive price while at the same time being strategic on it, think about from their perspective what information is helpful for them, and then simplify the back end so that you can come up with an answer that's actionable. This continues to the minute, the topic that we spoke about a minute ago, right? And I love it that some of the questions were already getting to some of the content we're going to cover, to the question of what do we mean by analytics, right? So there's, and I mentioned this earlier, but there's three types of typical analysis that we think about. Some of them are very descriptive. Some of them are predictive, and some of them are prescriptive, right? So, for example, the example that I gave about churn management, that would be predictive, right? There's a lot of companies that struggle with churn, right? Like there's as much account acquisition that you can do. You're losing some of the accounts on the back end. How do you maintain those accounts? And in some cases, again, with a large account, you'll know exactly why they're upset or not. You'll know exactly what to do to be able to maintain and keep the revenue from the company. However, there's many small companies, and you can't have the same approach with all of them, right? Like it's just impossible. So with them, can you identify what are the markers of companies that tend to be successful, loyal, and happy? And what are the markers of companies that are going to be likely to leave? And can you get ahead of them by predicting that potentially they're not happy and they're going to leave? And then can you use your sales force to go after them? So these are just some of the use cases that we've seen around.
Do you feel, Maria, let me pop in and ask a quick question here, because it sounds like Paul's question sparked a few people to think, and I don't mean to put you back just a little bit, but Sherry jumped in and mentioned, are you seeing a separation of teams doing analytics versus responsibility of building and maintaining data? It sounded like if you do have that advanced data team, maybe they are doing more of the analytics, and maybe you've got like sales operations, maybe doing more of the data cleansing or data, maintaining accuracy, et cetera. Do you see a differentiation there, or are those two functions often together?
No, I do see a differentiation because the skill set to the one and the other are quite different. So if I talk about competencies, what I see is you have to have a good data infrastructure. Some companies are there, many companies are not there yet. And that might require an investment up front. Before you get sophisticated with analytics, you might have to do some data cleaning, some data architecture work up front.
Yeah.
You then would think about the use cases and what are going to be the data analytics. And then a role that's critically important, and many organizations call it a readiness role, is how do you then translate the output from the analytics that the data scientists are going to be working on into something that's actionable for marketing, for sales, for the head of sales, for the sales rep, right? So I think that you can't stop at the data scientist. You have to come all the way down to the translation of that into how do I use that into my decision making.
Okay.
If I can just quickly add the feedback loop, right? Because again, this is just predictions. And many times we will predict something and in reality wasn't that. So how do you use then the insight of your maybe dozens, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of sellers that you might have out there? And how do you create a system that's quite easy to take those insights from the field back into your model and make your model smarter because of that?
Yeah, it seems like that feedback loop would be really important. We've got two people, both Tim and Connie kind of mentioned this, Maria, and just to continue this theme, they seem to be struggling in the cleanliness of the data. Like they want to get to analytics, but they're struggling because they felt like their data is bad. Any quick advice on, is it an outsourced vendor? Is it just time? You just got to kind of dedicate yourself to do it, to kind of get your data structure and data to a place where you can actually do some analytics on that? Any quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, so probably two thoughts. I think one of them would be just go, head down and actually invest in getting your data cleansed because you're going to need it over time. In the meantime, it shouldn't stop you. So can you start smaller pilots where your answer is going to be directionally correct, right? It's not going to be absolutely perfect, but can you start some of the modeling? This would also help to get some momentum within the organization. Right, many times people believe it's a big investment to clean the data, and then they don't see the upside. But can you take a portion of the data where you think it's going to be cleaner, or a use case where you think it's going to be okay to be directionally correct in terms of the upside potential, and then use that to gain the momentum with the organization to make the investment into cleaning the data?
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. I don't mean to interrupt too much, Maria, but sounds like it's an interesting topic, and we got a bunch of people
this is great. I love the questions. So for the audience, keep sending the questions. So when I look back at the times that I have helped companies think through this question of advanced analytics in sales, there's a few learnings that I wanted to share with the audience today. I think the first one is that the analytics need to be aligned with the seller's goals and skills. As I mentioned earlier, it cannot be an add-on program. So how do you think about integrating these into the same the same, CRM. So if I'm a seller, I log in on Monday morning and you're already giving me insights based on the analytics, as opposed to having a different report, a different download, a different meeting I have to go to. So how do you integrate it into my day-to-day business? That's number one. And two, number three, you have to think about the change effort, right? Again, as I said earlier, these might have to come with investments in technology, as we talked about. This might have to come with changes in terms of how you build the capabilities of your sellers, right? You cannot just launch a new program on better lead scoring if you're not going to help your sellers with their cold calling skills, for example, right? So how do you think about integrating your analytics, your sales operations, your capability building part of it? And what's important here is how do you help your executives, right? So the senior leaders in the organization to embrace the analytics. So they start making questions during their performance dialogues that are anchored on the analytics and they're anchored on the insights. That is really going to help with change management, because change management is a critical element as you're thinking about the end-to-end analytics journey.
I'd be interested, and I'm just going to throw it out to the audience if there's, she mentioned some of these, the change management or getting executives. I'd love to hear if there's a challenge that you've faced in getting advanced analytics into your business, because I've had two people now write in and say, their struggle has been with the executive team getting it bought in. And I wonder if that's kind of more of the audience. What's holding you back from advanced analytics? Again, according to two people here, their leadership team is just not really bought off on that it is important enough. Sales marketing. And then I've got one, maybe you guys can throw that in the Q&A, your answer. I'd love to hear that. And then one other question that just came in, Maria, from Dano here is, what function in the organization do you see owning the process? Is this sales, marketing, FP&A? And I assume it's the data process or this analytics process that we've talked about. And I think you mentioned before, it does roll up to sales eventually. That's kind of the sales ops, or if it's in the analytics world, maybe it does go somewhere else.
Correct. And you will have to think about cross-functional collaboration is more important than ever, right? So I think you have to be aligned all the way top to bottom. So data has to be the same data. You need to have a 360-degree view of the customer, and it has to be the same view that IT has, that customer service has, that marketing has. So the data infrastructure has to be, of course, a common one.
Yeah.
All the way down to objectives. Marketing, head of sales need to be 100% aligned in terms of how they think about what is the objective, what are the metrics that we're looking at, what is the goal that we're all going after. It has to be the same. So different organizations might have slightly different models in terms of data ownership and process ownership, but I think it is critical that you have this up and down alignment in terms of what is the 360-degree view of the customer, as well as what are the end objectives. Not easy, but critical.
That's right. Sometimes not as easy, but it is definitely important. So we've got a couple things coming in about use cases. And Christopher, I'll get to your question in just a second. Marie, do you mind if I jump into this kind of formal question? Because Christopher, it was kind of asking about, I've been thinking about advanced analytics in kind of the hiring process and matching optimal profiles to optimal sellers. And he wanted to kind of get your thought process on that. But let's maybe go to the audience real quick. As you guys think about advanced analytics impact areas, do you feel like, and we've just put some, and we probably should have put another up here because I'm sure there's tons, but as you look at this list, where do you feel like advanced analytics will? Now, it may not be in your current organization, but where you'd like to see it or where you think it can have the biggest impact. Is it more in the top of the funnel? Is it more in the bottom of the funnel? Is it more on the people side? Where do you feel like that will come out? And I'd love to kind of get that quick opinion from the group. What, as the people kind of fill that out, Christopher did ask, any thoughts on, and maybe you'll get into this in just a second, but quick thoughts on hiring and that particular use case about using advanced analytics to hire salespeople?
Absolutely. And I love the question. I think that's one of the top, using analytics to optimize your sales force is probably one of the hottest topics that I'm seeing right now, and a topic I'm personally very passionate about. So I love the question. I would say what we've seen, and just to share a potential few use cases, I think number one is that not every single salesperson is going to be successful in your organization or even successful in sales, right? So one of the things we've done at McKinsey is we have an approach to identify the traits of top performing sales reps within an organization. And within traits, you have intrinsic skills, motivation, culture. And when you look at top performers, the profiles tend to be very different than bottom performers. Variability in performance in sales tends to be very high, right? Like your top performers are really good. Then you have, your tail, your long tail that is not so good. And when you look at their intrinsic profiles, they're very different. So once you have that, adjusting your recruiting strategy, adjusting your target candidates that you're going after, adjusting how do you assess for the different skills is absolutely critical, because skills you can build, you can coach. Intrinsics you cannot change. So if you're hiring the wrong individual from the beginning, it is much harder to get them to an average performance versus if you hire the right intrinsics, and it's just a matter of learning product knowledge or improving negotiation skills or improving how to deliver a value proposition. So I agree that it's absolutely critical to use data to identify what is the successful seller in your organization, and then use that to define your hiring strategy as well as your capability building strategy, and ultimately your compensation strategy as well as career pathing and culture as well.
Yeah, we're getting feedback from the group here that a lot of people aren't thinking about analytics in the people area, which seems like it could make some real positive damage there. Christopher said, "Thank you, Christopher, for the question." Let's look at the answers real quick to this, Maria. I want to get your thoughts or your feedback on surprises or not. Looks like the majority of the group, really feel like pipeline management and forecasting kind of took home the bait there, actually. And then it was lead scoring. So lead scoring, pipeline management followed. Oh, no, actually personalized campaign. So you got a little bit of a blend there. Surprises in that based on, I know you'll talk a little bit about some of your data, but thoughts from the audience on that?
What I find surprising is that I saw nothing on deal scoring and very little on churning, right? So I think those are two use cases that I have seen quite a bit. Pipeline and forecasting, as well as, field productivity, I would agree with that. I think that, the majority of my clients are already using, analytics to help on both. I think that it comes back to how do you change management? Because if the data is generated not by your database and data warehouse, but by your people, the people need to have a common understanding on how you're defining the different stages of the sales funnel. They need to understand why it is so important to make sure that you continue, adding information into your CRM system. So the data cleanliness many times is because the user has a concern, like user concern data, as opposed to from a data warehouse that might not be clean data. But I think increasingly I have seen as we move to a new generation of sellers and younger people that are used to living on data, I think that increasingly this is becoming a lot easier. It's still not perfect, but it's still becoming a lot easier in terms of how to use data from your pipeline and forecast. Personalized campaigns, I love it, right? So I think that, bringing, I would say in consumer areas, personalized campaigns is probably a lot more advanced. I think that in the B2B world, there's still an opportunity to continue thinking about how do we learn from the B2C world to apply to the B2B world in terms of personalized campaigns as well.
Yeah, there's a couple more questions coming in about these different topics, Maria, but why don't you jump just a little bit further and see if you cover them here in kind of your next portion?
Yes, absolutely. So I wanted to share some of the use cases that I have seen and how we've categorized them. The first one being lead engine, and it's, again, one that was mentioned in the previous slide. Second one, productivity engine. And this is one where especially with large sales forces, there tends to be a huge opportunity to close that performance gap. That might be questions around coverage, or it might be questions around talent analytics, as we spoke a minute ago. And of course, pipeline management and forecasting is critical here. There's something around, we're calling it sales growth engine, but it's pretty much next product sell and upsell, cross sell. So again, you can predict the needs of companies, and you can become so much more sophisticated than you were before. You can look at peer groups, and basic analytics that you can do here is you can think about what is the right comparison group, and based on that, what is the right average basket size, and how often they should be buying what type of products, what is the amount that they should be buying per product, to help you assess if somebody's not at that level, just give them a call. Why not, right? So, most law firms that buy paper also buy ink, and you're a small law firm and you're buying paper but not ink, right? So there's still some basic things that you can do there that are quite fun to, again, help the seller in terms of how to prioritize his time. And then lastly, with dynamic pricing, right? Dynamic pricing and deal scoring, I think that There's, many companies still have a lot on the table in terms of how to better enable the sales force to use smarter analytics in terms of deal negotiation. I have seen companies that use, for example, as you're pricing a deal, you get immediate feedback as to how well you're pricing the deal. Are you among the 90% of people who price a similar deal to this one? What is going to be the impact to your compensation if you increase the price by $100 or if you decrease the price by $100? So that immediate feedback is helping change how some sellers are thinking about pricing as well.
Interesting. So a couple quick things on this. Do you feel like with this list, we actually had 3 people more or less kind of ask, is there a place to start? Do you feel like we've got Tim here that probably said it best is we've been looking at different areas of our own business to basically get advanced analytics up and going. Is there a place you recommend companies do start, or is it just based on problems?
I would recommend companies to anchor when on where the value is, right? So if you think about your market potential, many of my clients think about historical as opposed to future potential. So they think about their large accounts as the large accounts. And in reality, there's probably other large accounts that are not even in your data set, or that are small accounts that haven't grown yet. So I think for me, I would always anchor it on where is the opportunity. And of course, the next question would be how to capture it. But anchoring on the opportunity is the most important one. How to capture is it a lead generation question? Is it a people question? Is it a coverage question? You can then solve based on the specific issues that you're running into or opportunities that you have in front of you.
That makes sense. A couple, and I don't want to dive too deep in this, but we've got a couple of people asking questions about some of these use cases. Sounds like they're either looking at this currently or they're doing it right now. One's on lead scoring. We've got someone who's, look, one of the problems with my lead scoring tool is my people don't really understand how it's scored. How can I help my reps, better understand why they should be focusing on the accounts I want them to focus on? I know it's a little bit tactical, but thoughts on that?
No, I love it because I think it's thematic, right? The theme here is that if your sales force thinks that there's a black box, they will not believe the data and they will not adapt to it. Right. Yeah. So again, you have to think about change management from beginning to end. And what I have done, first of all, when I work with executives and they have very fancy models, I say, you cannot, and when you're trying to predict too much, I say this is too complicated. If the seller will not understand it, he will not use it. I think so. The first question is, can you simplify it and still have a good model? And then the second question would be, can you break it down and explain it to the seller? So can you explain to the seller that you're using a pacing model based on last year's performance adjusted for capacity, right? And can you explain it in simple words? If they see what's behind that black box, they're more likely to understand it and then to use it. And of course, if they don't agree with it and they have any feedback, they can share it with you. But again, when there's a black box behind it, and if I try, you give me a few leads and you believe they're scored higher, and I tried the top 3 and they didn't work, I'm not going to go after the next 7. Right. So I think with salespeople, you want to pilot it. You want to find ambassadors within the organization who can use this and share it with others. So it's not corporate saying use this, but it's actually themselves telling their friends and their colleagues to use something and the value of it.
I think that's fantastic. It's that black box sometimes that keeps reps from knowing. And if you can open it up, I think that's huge. One other use case question, then we'll continue. And guys, really appreciate these questions. It's been engaging. We probably won't have as many Q&A, but we will be wrapping up here shortly. So stick with us. But thanks for making it engaging. This one's on forecasting. And you just got someone saying, hey, look, in my CRM, it says my forecast changes so often. And this is coming from Alan, by the way. My forecast changes so often. In my CRM, I can't seem to get that change piece nailed down as much. Is that something that I could really nail down with advanced analytics? Thoughts on trying to capture change analysis more real time, better, if you will? Sorry.
Well, I think it depends, and maybe it's a question back. It depends on what element are you trying to change, right? Because if you're changing, are you changing your forecast because you're not performing, you're overperforming, and therefore you're adjusting it on an ongoing basis? And is your concern that you're not going to meet your forecast, or is your concern that you're changing the goals on your salespeople? So I think there's certain things where you want to be careful on how dynamic you are, and forecast might be one of those where, hopefully you have a forecast and if it's not good enough, you adjust it, but you don't adjust it that often because there's a little bit of change fatigue. So I like being agile and dynamic, and in some cases you want to be that, but I think in other cases you have to be careful not to confuse people.
Perfect. Perfect.
Wonderful. So I had two quick cases. I think we've talked a lot, so let me just be brief on this. I think the first one was a technology company, and again, they had lack of customer archetypes. In reality, as I mentioned, they were using historical revenue data as where the opportunity is, as opposed to trying to estimate what is the size of the prize and what is the size of the potential that I have. They had a very high variability in performance. This is actually, frankly, something that is true for the majority of clients I work with. Their compensation model was set up many years ago and it was never updated, right? So what we did there is we came up with a model to help them understand where the opportunity is, and then very quickly think about how to redesign your coverage model. That doesn't only mean what account goes what to what rep, but also means what type of skill set is required to go after what type of accounts and where the opportunity is. We use sales DNA, which is the approach I mentioned earlier around identifying the profiles of the top performers for this organization. So we don't believe that, a top seller can be a top seller anywhere. You need to understand for this organization, this sales motion, this role, what is the profile for that? And then, of course, we looked at the compensation model. We saw 15% growth in operating income, which was a company that was operating in a declining operating income setup. So it was absolutely needed and it was very well received. I would say here what was critical in addition to all the modeling was the change management part of it, right? Making sure that the frontline felt that they were part of this process, that they were helping us inform the process, and that there was capability building that came along with all of the new tools and solutions and insights. We helped them build their capabilities on how to have, the right insights conversation, the right value proposition delivery, the right negotiation skills to come along with everything else to be able to capture the opportunity. We have a second case here, and it's a logistics company. And this one again was one of the basic organizations that had little analytics. They had decentralized data collection. And to the question earlier of how good your data has to be, in this case, we actually invested quite a bit upfront in building what I mentioned, the 360-degree customer view, which was absolutely important. And then coming up not only with models to predict need and predict buying behaviors, but use that to inform back to marketing and think about the marketing campaigns that were going to be targeted based on the analytics we had done. So this is one of the cases that I really liked because we really came back with a model that got marketing and sales working together very tightly, which was absolutely needed. I think with that, I wanted to, share a few messages that I think are very important. The first one is that analytics should be a business-led topic versus IT, right? I think that, it shouldn't be IT driving the agenda of where you're going to invest your money or what analytics use cases you're going to develop and what is going to be specifically the interface. IT can come up with very fancy interfaces, but they're not necessarily always useful for the seller. You need to have the seller in charge of designing the interface, and that is absolutely critical. As I've mentioned, capturing the value from analytics requires change management and many times capability building. Just coming up with new analytic models is not going to get you there. So you have to think holistically around how do you think about, again, sales ops, operations, capability building, and then your leadership being those that are role modeling different behavior. You don't need perfect data to get started. As I mentioned earlier, can you think about a pilot? Can you think about coming up with an answer that's directionally correct to get the momentum going and to get your leadership excited? Doesn't have to be a major data investment. I'm sure everybody has somewhere in the organization a lot of data from where you can get a lot of insights. And then lastly, think about building that small analytical team, right? Whether, maybe you have a stronger analytics presence already in the organization and you can leverage some of that. Otherwise, you might think about having to build it within sales operations and sales enablement. But think about the different skill set that you will need to be able to manage the size of the analytics and the scope of the analytics that you're looking for.
Perfect. Well, I think that brings us kind of to a wrap, Maria. I know we're just a little bit over on time. We've got a couple other questions coming in. Again, really appreciate the audience and some of the interaction. If you've got some wrap-up questions, we'll get to those now. As you ask those questions, I'm just going to flash this. I think Maria would be offended if you didn't connect with her on LinkedIn. Continue the dialogue. You can find her on some other social channels here. And we certainly appreciate Maria's time, and we'll take just a few more minutes. If you do have some other questions, I think I've got most of them, but a couple here. One that's come in, and this is just a higher level question, Maria, I think just about your experience in dealing with different companies in analytics. It's coming from Hassan here. What's your biggest challenge so far while discussing analytics with companies? Where do you typically see that the problem is lying?
So it's probably the lack of guidance and prioritization, right? So I think it's if you paint the art of the possible, there's so much that companies can do that I think they get a little bit paralyzed because of the magnitude of the opportunity. So I think that's number one. And I think helping them define what is it that you're solving for and how you prioritize your use cases is probably number one. I think number two, the gap in the sophistication of the analytics versus the simplicity of what the seller needs, right? There's a big gap that I see there, and I've seen some phenomenal models that are very hard to make it useful for a seller, right? So how do you close the gap between that? Those are probably the top two that I have seen.
Interesting. Yeah, that seems like those would be probably fairly prevalent. Let's get to a couple more here before we wrap. Stephen just wrote in, when do you see AI and robotics process engines being used against data sets to drive value? Excuse me, where do you see AI and robotic process engines being used against data sets to drive value?
I love the question, and in the sales process we're starting to see it. It's still on the smaller side. If you look at it on customer service, I think customer service is a lot more prevalent. So where I have seen it, the two specific areas where I have seen it, one of them is lead generation, right? So where you can already define what is going to be your ideal lead, and then you can already define what is the initial dialogue that you would want to have with a prospect. And you can do this via over email, in some cases chat. And then once the connection is happening and you have a warmer lead, you pass that on to a rep, an inside sales rep, or a field rep, or even a channel partner. So I think at the very early stages of that. The second place where I have seen it is very easy transactions, right? So for example, service to sales in the telco world. So you're calling me because you have a question about your cell phone bill. And by the way, I can upgrade you to the next plan, right? So something that's very simple, that there's only 3 or 4 options pre-configured. There's no negotiation that needs to happen because it's a set price. So I'm beginning to see AI in sales in cases that's either at the very early stages of the sales process or very transactional relationships or products that are being sold.
Perfect. Interesting. Well, Maria, let's use that as kind of a wrap. Again, please do connect with Maria, connect with myself. If we can continue the dialogue, we'd be more than happy to. Thanks so much for joining. Maria, before we let go, any kind of closing statements or things you'd like to leave with the audience?
Thank you so much for listening. I was very excited to be here with Gabe, so hopefully we'll do this again another time. And do connect. I love staying in touch, and this is actually how Gabe and I met, by connecting with each other online. So hopefully we'll be able to get a few more relationships coming out of here.
All right. Well, again, thanks everybody for joining, and have a fantastic day.
Thank you.